your thrifty apprentice. Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome to a special release of a thrifty review. In today's special thrifty review, we are going to be reviewing the Artwell 24 half pan watercolor set along with the Artwell 100% cotton watercolor paper, 300 GSM, 140 pound acid free. So before we get started, a few disclaimers. In full disclosure, you guys will probably remember seeing a unboxing video, which I will link in the top corner, as well as the video description, just a day or two ago. Now, the reason you're seeing a review so quickly behind that unboxing video is because I have already tested and shot the videos that I was going to be testing these paints in, and they are set for release throughout the month of October for Inktober. So you will be seeing this review much earlier or much sooner than you see a lot of the paintings that the set is going to be used in. I would also like to give the disclaimer that this was sent to me for free, along with the watercolor paper, as well as a 24 half pan of glitter paints, which will be reviewed a little later on down the line. That in no shape, form, or fashion will have any effect on my honest opinion that I give forth on the product, my use of the product, and what I think the quality is in comparison to the prices that are currently being charged for them. I did want to give that information just in case that affects any viewer's opinion on, whether or not you feel you should listen to what I have to say. I don't do paid sponsored reviews, and I do give all of the information that I feel is relevant to the best of my abilities based on research as well as on my experience with watercolors that I've collected, gathered, and learned over the last 5 to 6 years. All right, now that we've gotten all that out the way, let's jump right in. I won't go through a lot as far as the unboxing is concerned because we've already done that video. As you know, it comes in very simple, streamlined, straightforward packaging, which I can actually appreciate. It had a color swatching on the back. The cardboard is made from pretty heavy stock, to be honest, and the inside is reminiscent of Paul Rubens and the way they wrap their watercolor products. Inside that box is a metal lavender tin that has a sticker logo. So I'm assuming that they do buy the tins in mass stock and then just put their logo on them. The latching of the tin is pretty secure, works pretty well, no issue there. There's a ring on the very bottom for plain air painting, although I've always thought that the idea of this is pretty flimsy and I never use it. I'm not sure about any of you guys. There's 5 mixing wells on the inside, top lid of the palette, as well as a mixing space that flips out adjacent and leans pretty flush against the tin, so you won't have any issues with mixing. Now, I didn't have any issue with the paints beading up on the palette, but we are going to talk about the paints drying down on the palette in just a moment. There is a inserted metal holder for all 24 half pans, and of course, if you remove that, you do have additional mixing wells on the very bottom of your tin. Each half pan is clipped into the metal ringer. Of course, these are pretty standard in pretty much all metal tin half pan sets, so it should be something that you're familiar with. And we do have a standard size pan of paint that is definitely machine cut and glued into the half pan. So, and all of them are domed over and pretty filled to about the same capacity, which again lets me know that they're probably machine cut. So that is your packaging, straightforward, no bells and whistles. Extra space down the middle. You could probably fit half pans. Maybe like a Winsor & Newton half pan may fit in there, or maybe not. But the palette actually comes with a water brush, a large water brush, with a medium to large nylon head on it. Pretty standard. Same one comes in the glitter set, and it's also the same brush that came in my Pago set, which we're going to get to talking about that shortly as well. So that's how the paints come on the inside of the palette You do have included a swatch card, which we went over in the unboxing. It's on what I believe to be probably about a 90-pound mixed media paper. You're going to have all of the information relevant for the paints included, the stock number, the color name, the vehicle that binds the pigment into the paint, the pigment number, the light fast grade information, as well as the transparency information. I'll go ahead and let you know that the light fast information is graded on a scale of 1 to 8, which lets me know that they work on the blue rule scale. Okay. That's pretty much all that's included in the package as far as the paints are concerned. The paper pad itself is a A4 size paper pad. It has 24 sheets of 9 by 12, 100% cotton, 300 GM, 140-pound acid-free cold press paper. Okay, so again, they like to keep their packaging and their designing pretty streamlined and simple. Now, some people may take it as kind of economical looking, should I say? But I think that overall it's kind of appealing. I personally kind of like it. Let me just say it like that. Some nice artwork on the front, and it is the standard put together glue bound paper pad. Okay, and we're going to get into talking about that paper in just a moment. All right, so let's get all this closed up and get this just put over to the side for just a second, and we are going to jump right into talking about the quality of the paints. So I swatched the paints out on their 100% cotton watercolor paper. And of course, I also swatched the paints out on the included, what I took to be mixed media paper, and did glazing on both. What I have experienced is that this is, for all intents and purposes, a very bright and vibrant 24 color range set. There's a nice set of colors in here. Nothing is really samey at all by any means. All of the colors seem to paint out with a pretty standard consistency. There wasn't much difference in the characteristics of the paints, other than like maybe the ultramarine blue, the cobalt blue. Both of those had a little difference because they both granulated just a very little bit. And other than that, they were all pretty much the same. The glazing went pretty well. There didn't seem to be much issue with that. I did an opacity test here. For the most part, all of the paints are transparent to semi-opaque. I didn't really find anything that was just super opaque. There is not a white included, which I was able to appreciate. And the black, for all intents and purposes, is a pretty dark ivory black. Now, there is going to be a shift from wet to dry. I want to say it's about a 20% shift, which is standard, I think, for an economical set of paints. Yet they still retain a lot of their vibrancy, as you can see. The colors are really saturated, even when watered down into a first layer watery wash. And then they took the glazing and layering really well. And even with that, it still did not build a lot of opacity in the paints that were considered transparent. That lets me know that the paints are not filled with brighteners and extenders and fillers. Now, that's not to say that there's not any in the paints at all, because I'm sure they are, with it being a budget set. I'm just saying that the pigment ratio in the paints seem to be higher than most of the budget sets that I've experienced in this competitive price point. So we did color mixing in order to see how the paints did with mixing. Now, this is where I'm going to say I think that they really did excel. I didn't have any issues with them. They mixed together really well, and I did not experience any mud creation from those mixtures. Now, believe it or not, that has a lot to do with the fact that of the 24 paints, I want to say 20 of them are single pigment Watercolors. Yes, 20 of the 24 paints are single pigment colors, and we are going to go through those in just a moment. Now, I will say, now that we're actually on the pigment information, that there are a few discrepancies, I do believe, that are listed on the actual swatching sheet as far as maybe the light fast ability of some of the paints. And with the burnt sienna, it's that one particular, I believe, has a misprint as far as the pigment information is concerned. And again, we're going to get to pigment information in just a moment. I just want to make sure that I've covered pretty much everything before I jump into talking about the individual pigments. The paints, again, as I said earlier, did not really bead up on the palette, but I'm going to insert some pictures at this point, which is going to show you how the paints flaked once they were left to dry with a lot of water mixed into it. So where the paint to water ratio was much more water than it was paint, you will see that a lot of the paints dry down and tend to have flaked up off of the palette, which again is indicative that it's not just all pigments. As I said earlier, I'm sure that there are some fillers. I don't think many optical brighteners, but definitely some fillers to help stretch some of the pigments, just to help keep the paint economical and affordable. But still pretty decent quality. I definitely will say that. I do believe that they are pretty decent because they hit all the check marks as far as the packaging, as far as the tin. Swatching the paints went really well. Now, as we were talking about color mixing, mixing the primaries of red, yellow, and blue. French ultramarine, and this particular one being the standard blue that I use for all of the mixing, gave pretty vibrant greens and purples. The scarlet, which is the more magenta leaning color in the set, mixed well with the lemon yellow to give me a decent orange. So then I did a cross temperature color wheel where I used the lemon yellow, cobalt blue, and Chinese red, which I believe is probably the most transparent true red in the set, which again gave me really clean mixtures here. A more vibrant orange, definitely. You can see the difference in the hues of those colors, which are dramatically different from the ones that are actually included, because here you're going to get a yellow orange, a orange red, which are pretty orangey just from first glance. So that lets me know that you can mix the paints. You're going to be able to pull a split primary palette from the paints in order to mix a really wide range of colors. However, they are beneficial to beginners because there are 24 colors, and the convenience colors, for all intents purposes, are pretty transparent because, again, 20 single pigments of 24 paints. Not bad at all. So we mixed standard, I guess you could call it Payne's Gray, by putting the ultramarine and the burnt sienna. And it gave me a pretty nice Payne's Gray. I will say though, I'm not a fan of the burnt sienna in this set. Unlike the other 23, it did not paint out with the same consistency. It had sort of a gloopy texture, in my opinion. From time to time, it seemed to kind of cake up on the brush. And I'll be really honest, the paints in a lot of ways remind me of Superior paints. And I did reach out to Artwell to ask them whether or not Superior are the ones who white label the paints, or maybe Owens Art, because they also put me in the mind of the pretty excellent line of paints with the brightness and the vibrancy and the transparency of the overall product. I am waiting on them to respond to that. It's going to take me a couple of days to shoot this entire review video, so hopefully they would have responded to me by the time I wrap up presenting all of this information. I did a bit more of a transparency test here, just to see how the paints would look on cellulose paper, because here we were on 100% cotton. Now this is Masters Touch Fine Art Studio 140 pound cold press, acid free, and this is a cellulose student grade paper, which is pretty readily available. And again, I think the paints did a really nice job. Performed a salt test, You're going to get some texture and granulation from the salt. Now, later on in the month of October, we're going to get to a day during Inktober where I use the paints in order to create a frost effect on a glass. And we're going to be looking at this shortly. I found the paints to kind of be lacking in taking to salt. Here you can see a little texture, but not nearly as much of a disbursement of texture saturation. I can't think of the word that I'm trying to find right now. Bloomage. They didn't bloom as much as they normally do whenever I use the salt. Here we normally do a lift test together just so you guys can see how the paints lift. And I'm just grabbing my number 8 Menta Scrubber by Royal and Langnickel. This is a wonderful line of synthetic swirl brushes. Well, all except the scrubber anyway. You can pick them up from like Joann's. That's where I picked mine up. And I think you can also order them off Amazon. If I can remember, I'll link them just in case anybody's interested in taking a look at those. But as you can see, those paints lift beautifully. I had absolutely no issue with the lifting of the paints at all. Again, I'm going to say it. They remind me a lot of like a cross between Superior or Owens Art. And although I don't work for Artwheel or either one of those companies, I would not be surprised if these were probably Superior white label paints. I really wouldn't. We're going to wait to see if they get back to us. Hopefully we will be able to get an answer on that. But the representative that I have been communicating with on Instagram about the paints is very professional, very straightforward and honest. They've communicated effectively. This has been a wonderful experience with Artwheel, I will honestly say. Now that has no effect on what I'm saying about the paints, but I can appreciate the professionalism that has been shown in this overall ordeal. So great on the lifting. Here I wanted to kind of lift, y'all getting to see my notes. Here I wanted to kind of, paint out the earth tones, primary earth tones that were in the set, just to see how they would look on cellulose paper, because I was already impressed with the way that they painted out on the 100% cotton paper. So for overall testing, I would definitely say that the paints performed well. I really did not see many issues with the paints at all. Let's really quickly go through the pigment numbers, the pigment list, because I think there's a little bit of information variance as far as the light fastness, and I don't know if it's because it's on the blue wool scale or if because the paints may possibly be white label. Of course, Artwheel is just going with the information that's presented to them by the factory. With that being said, we'll start with the permanent lemon yellow. And as you guys can see, I just took the wrappers off of the pans and actually put them on my main swatch sheet. That way I didn't have to write that information there. And I wanted to test their paper with the swatching. So that permanent lemon yellow has a pigment number of PY3. They have it listed at a light fast grade of 7. And on the blue wool scale, 7 or 8 is listed as over 100 years, but I do believe that to be a bit of a stretch, because PY3 pigment is marginally light fast. It really depends on how the pigment is handled. I do believe that there are other yellow pigments out there, although PY3 is pretty standard in budget sets. So I'm not saying it's a bad color at all or a bad pigment at all. I wouldn't necessarily put it at being a 7. I would put it I wouldn't put it as being exceptionally light fast. It would probably be somewhere around moderately light fast. Moving on, the next color is transparent medium yellow. Pigment number PY65, light fast. They give it a grade of 5. If I'm not mistaken, that was 5 fair, yes, which I definitely agree with. PY65 is not the most light fast of pigments. You're going to get about 15 or 50 years according to that particular blue wool scale on it. Next up, we have cadmium yellow orange, which is pigment PO20 light fast grade of 8, and they're saying the transparency is that it's opaque. Ironically enough, I did not experience much opacity out of that color in painting it out. And I painted it out twice to make sure. Certain colors I wanted to paint out twice in opacity check. And my black line is pretty clear, although it is listed on the information as being opaque. I found the paints to be pretty transparent, which is a great thing. Wonderful. Now the PO20 pigment, I would agree that is a CAD pigment, and they have it listed as a light fast of being 8, and that is a pretty light fast pigment number. Next up, you got permanent orange red pigment PO73 light fast grade of 7, and transparency they have listed as semi-opaque. I don't see any discrepancies with that. I can see PO73 being somewhere around a very less, and all of the information and research that I pull from comes from handprint.com, KimberlyCrick.com, and artiscreation.com. I'll be sure to link all of my reference sources in the video description in case you guys want to double check or triple check behind anything I say about pigments. I want to always cite sources and give you guys another way to reference it in case you want to. Let's move on and get through these right quick. Scarlet, we got PR123. They're giving it a light fast grade of 7, making it extremely light fast. I'm gonna have to disagree with that. I don't know if I would give PR123 based on what I know in the research information that I've seen over 100 years. Actually, it's probably somewhere around the not light fast to moderately light fast realm based on handprint.com. Next up, we have Chinese red, which is PR254 light fast grade of 8. I'm gonna have to go with them on that one. That is a pretty light fast pigment, although that's commonly like viral red in a lot of different sets. A color like a name like that, and it's normally pretty light fast. Next up, you have violet, which is PV19. I've seen PV19 be listed for like Queen Rose. Pretty decent light fast color, not anything that you should have any issues with. Next up is permanent violet, which is PV23. They're calling it permanent violet. I normally see it listed as dioxazine violet, if I'm not mistaken, which again is a pretty light fast pigment. Here we have PB17 peacock blue. I've seen it called peacock blue. I've also seen it called like cyan. I've seen it called turquoise or cyan turquoise, if I'm not mistaken. That was a Holbein pigment that they no longer make in other companies, or they discontinued their color or something. Next up, we have cobalt blue pigment number PB28, which is typically the cobalt pigment, and it's a pretty light fast reliable pigment. Next up, we have French ultramarine pigment PB29, which is the ultramarine pigment. Again, a light fast pigment, and both of those pigments, as you can see, do have a bit of granulation and texture to them, which is indicative of both of them. Next up, we have Prussian blue with PB27. Again, that is the Prussian blue pigment, and they're not listing it as being very light fast. Of course, it's not. Prussian blue is one of those chameleon colors where if you put it in the sun, it'll kind of lose its vibrancy and dull down. But if you put it back in the shade, then the true color will come back. And I happen to love it. It's one of my favorite colors. Next up, we have turquoise light. They have it listed as PB36. Now, PB36 is normally like cobalt, or maybe sometimes cerulean. I think I've seen it listed as cobalt turquoise. It's a pretty light fast pigment, actually. So next up, we have permanent green, first dual pigment of all of those, which is pretty impressive for a budget paint here. PG36 being phthalo green, and PY74 for is, I've seen it, yellow medium, Hunter yellow medium. I think I've seen that it's both of them pretty decent light fast pigments from what I understand. Although it's a dual pigment, I think it may dull down a little bit the more you mix it because it's already dual pigment, but pretty clean color. And you can see here, it was actually pretty transparent as well. So wasn't a big issue with it being dual pigment. Next up, we have Tree Green, which is 4 different pigments. We have PG36, PY12, PR101, and PW5. And it's the first one that actually lists that it actually has a white in it. PW5 is opaque white, which is definitely going to dull down the saturation of the pigment. PG36 is phthalo green yellow shade. PY12 is about a moderately light fast, which is a pigment yellow. PR101, I'm not really familiar with PY12. I'm gonna be very honest. That's not a color that I've run across a lot that I can recall in watercolor paints. PR101 is going to be your Indian red, burnt sienna, Venetian red, depending on what company you get it from. Just beware of that one. This would be one of the few colors I was worried about in many different mixtures, simply because it's already made up of 4. But once again, you're going to see here, it's still pretty transparent, even with it being listed as having 4 pigments in it. So I was thoroughly impressed with the paints. Next up, we have Hooker's Green Light PG17. PG17 is chrome oxide, or I've actually seen it listed as olive green as well. It's a pretty okay green. It's a light fast pigments, but it's staining. It's staining. It's definitely staining. Next up, we have Emerald Green Deep. Emerald Green Deep PG7 Phthalo Green Blue shade, pretty light fast. Next up, we have Yellow Ochre PY42, which is the normal yellow ochre pigment, pretty light fast. Umber is made up PR101, again, burnt sienna pigment, Venetian red, Indian red, depending on who makes it and how it's milled. PBR7, which is your pigment brown 7, which is burnt sienna, raw umber, burnt umber. I've seen that pigment number used across a variety of them, which is why the next one you roll across, red ochre, is a version of PR101. So both of those colors are going to be pretty light fast colors. The burnt sienna, again, the only one of the 24 set I wasn't all that happy with as far as consistency and just the way it painted out. And this also has a misprint on the pigment number because it has the pigment listed as PB7. And of course, we know that it's a brown pigment, not a blue pigment. So I do believe there was a misprint that should say PBR7, the same pigment that makes up the next color, burnt brown. They're just probably milled a bit differently, but nonetheless, a pretty reliable color. Payne's Gray is made up of PB15, PB29, PBK9, which we have Ultramarine, Phthalo Blue, and Ivory Black, all pretty consistently light fast colors. But being all mixed together in a Payne's Gray, probably going to drop the light fastness down a bit. And they have it listed as moderately, which I would agree with. But it's still a pretty transparent color. All of them were. Even the ones that say semi-opaque really turned out to be pretty transparent. And the Ivory Black was the only one that has any type of opacity to it. Once you start to layer it up as a black really should. And it is PBK9, which is a pigment black ivory. That is that pigment number. So I wanted to run through that so that you could see not only the fact that most of the paints were single pigment, but that if you base and pull from the information provided, contingent upon you believe what they're providing to you, then this is definitely a good quality set of paints. Now, let me check just to see if they have responded to whether or not these are all white labeled superior paint. And in the meantime, we will take a look at some of the things done with them. This was the first thing that came out with them, which I've put in the frame. That was the potion bottle that came out on the unboxing. Beautiful turnout of the paints. They perform so well on their paper, which is another product that I think is pretty decent. It had a little bit more buckling in it than I was expecting for 100% cotton paper, but I think it's a better grade than most of the cellulose papers that you hear me recommend on a regular basis, like the Strathmore 400, Fabriana Studio. I would definitely put it above both of those papers. And I do believe I'm going to be switching my regular, just everyday use studio paper over to the Artwell, because it's pretty affordable for 2 pads of 24 9x12 100% cotton paper. So we did the Artwell was the potion bottles. Artwell was also frosted window, which I was telling you guys I used the paints to do a frosted window prompt, which I'm just finding because I don't want to flip through all of my Inktober sketches. I want to save a lot of them for that flip through. So here I used the paints in order to create a frost effect on the glass for Inktober prompt. And this is why I was telling you that they didn't really seem to perform all that well with salt, and it wasn't just on this particular paper, it was also on watercolor paper. So both the watercolor paper and the mixed media paper both tell the same story. I mean, they will react to salt, just not as well as some other paints I know. But other than that, it was a really easy paint and didn't have many issues with it. The next painting that they were used in was for the this painting of a porthole, sort of looking out of a porthole on a ship of a boat. I was mixing them with Van Gogh granulating watercolors, and they played so well with that other set of watercolors. They didn't seem to lose any vibrancy or brightness, and the mixtures didn't get muddy, even though I was mixing it with a completely different student grade brand paints that possibly, well, without a doubt had a different formulation and could have added more fillers to the paint, but they still came out really clean with the mixes, which I could appreciate. And I had fun with all of my Inktober things, to tell you the God honest truth. Next up, I used the paints in, let's see, did I use them in anything else? I used them in a dagger tattoo painting, so I used them here. I was designing, dagger was the prompt. I designed a dagger tattoo. And so, and a lot of these that you're seeing now have not even released on the channel, but I still needed to go ahead and get this done and tagged. Loved the dagger painting, had so much fun doing it. And last but not least, I used the paints in a painting of some Chinese lantern plant. And here I also used the half pan of glitter watercolors that they sent. They played really well together to create this mixed media piece. And I'll be honest, I haven't gotten around to using them a lot, but I had fun with those glitter paints, and I think I'm really going to enjoy composing a composition with them. So those are the things that I've done to gain some experience with the paints. Overall, great paints. I still did not get a response as of yet about whether or not these are a white label superior product or Owens Art product. If I ever should get an answer to that, I'll be sure to update the video description for you guys, because at this point, I'm pretty sure this review has been long enough, if anybody is even still around listening. Because I know I got pretty deep into some pigment information there, and it may not have been relevant to everybody. But if you're still here, thank you for sticking around. So guys, there you have it. There is my in-depth look at the Artwell watercolor paints. Overall, I think that they are a really good value. The paints are currently listed on Amazon at $23.99. Now, you heard me say earlier that, you know, when you compare them to other half-pan paints in that competitive price point, I think they are a pretty good buy. Now, the one thing I compared them the most against was the Maybelline Pretty Excellent set. Now, this again being a super vibrant, very beautiful, nice color range. And you can get these paints for the most part for around $20 for 36 colors, which is almost unheard of and unbeatable. But they remind me so much of the Artwell paints. They have a lot of the same characteristics and qualities, which is why I was kind of curious if Owen Art, the same company that manufactures the Maybelline Pretty Excellent, Paul Rubens professional line of paints, if they were white labeling these. I could also see them being white labeled by Superior, as I said earlier, because not only do they perform brilliantly like a Superior paint, if you pay attention to the paint palette, it gives you that same little divot characteristics, that semi-glossy, dimpled paint palette once the paints have been used for a while, which really leads me to believe that they're white labeled by Superior. But again, if I ever find that information out one way or the other for sure, and it not just be us speculating about it, I will definitely update the video description. Because keep in mind that whenever you hear any of the content creators or any of us say a paint may be made by a certain company, it's purely us speculating, but we're basing it off of experience and our use of other brands of paints and just kind of comparing them to each other. So, you know, you have to take it how you will. Great buy. If you want to add them to your arsenal, I don't see how it could be a bad decision. Wonderful paints for a beginner, large selection of colors, so you won't have any issues as you learn to color mix. Once you learn to color mix, or for artists who are looking for a more limited palette, you're going to get a split primary palette, and it's going to be mainly of single pigment paints. Literally, it is 20 single pigments. You pull those 4 dual plus pigments out and you have a pure 20 color pigment palette. Pretty impressive for $24. No one could convince me differently, and it has nothing to do with me getting them for free. That's pretty impressive. Now, with all that said, I still personally prefer the 24 tube set over the 24 half pan set, simply because I believe the 24 tube set is a better quality and value. Just keep in mind that if you get the 24 tube set, and I've already panned mine up here, if you decide to let them dry down in the palette, they are going to crack some type of viciously. So I do suggest you add a drop of glycerin and mix it in with a toothpick as you allow them to dry down to keep them from cracking. But outside of that, this is an amazing palette of paints. And the tubes are 15 milliliters, so you are going to get so much paint that you will have for quite some time, and it's a good quality product. The 24 half pans would fall directly behind that. So they have definitely made my top 5 budget watercolor paint sets. And I will be releasing a video in November on the top 5. Probably gonna do a 5 under 25 video, and then I'll you know, make some recommendations for Christmas and all those good things. So stay tuned for all of that coming up in the month of November. Okay guys, there you have it. Hopefully this review hasn't been too long-winded for you. If you heard any information that you found helpful, if you saw anything that you found helpful or enjoyed just hanging out with me for another review, please don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. Share the video. Sharing is caring. Maybe there is someone else out there who would like to know the information on this Artwell set. If you're new to the channel, or if you're returning and you haven't subscribed, please consider hitting that subscription button. Go ahead and hit that notification bell so that you will know when all of the new content is uploaded on the channel. You can check the video description for all of the relevant links from the most recommended product list, which this will be added to. The Patreon and the Etsy link. In case you decide you want to support the channel, keeping in mind that Patreon has quite a few perks to it. And you will also find the link for paints, pencils, pastels, and markers, the Open to All Facebook group, which welcomes all artists and crafters. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a great day. And as I tell you at the end of every single video, just keep painting and crafting.